to give some context of the ambition level, 11,000 gigawatts is extremely ambitious, and it would require something like 3 gigawatts of additional capacity per day, every day between now and 2030. So that's 3,000 megawatts a day.
When looking at the usual UN climate conference, one could almost get the impression that there are more fossil industry lobbyists than actual politicians. However, currently, companies and organizations representing more than 12 trillion in market value, responsible for the majority of the world's renewable energy development and hailing from all 6 populated continents, have published an open letter to address world leaders. In it, they call for a tripling of renewable energy capacity to 11,000 gigawatt by 2030, and they want it to be agreed upon at COP28 later this year. COP28 later this year will be a critical moment for leaders to translate their ambition into real action to stay on track for the 1.5 degrees pathway. But what exactly are the demands in this open letter? Which actors are addressed by it? And are the proclaimed goals even realistic? We will find out in this episode. Welcome to the Smartery podcast, a podcast for and with the creators of the new energy world. A world in which energy will be renewable, decentralized and digital, bringing together electricity, heat and mobility. Let us show you how we will get there and who will get us there. For a deep insight into the mentioned open letter, I'm very happy to be speaking to Bruce Douglas. Not only has he 25 years of international experience promoting renewable energy and electrification, but most importantly, he is CEO of the brand new Global Renewables Alliance and has been involved in drafting this open letter and getting international stakeholders together. Let's hear what he had to say. Welcome to the Smartery podcast, Bruce. Such a pleasure to be talking to you.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. Pleasure to join you.
And I remember last time actually we had you live on stage at the Smartery Europe. That was just before you started your new role, but you already were teasing it. So now you've been actually 1 month into the job. I think you've been intensely busy. First up, congrats to really getting all these stakeholders globally together to forming the Global Renewables Alliance. Most listeners probably know you because of your role previously in Solar Power Europe and Eurelectric. So maybe give us an update to what the Global Renewables Alliance actually is about and what exactly you're working on at the moment.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. And it was a great pleasure to be with you at Munich at that Smarter E conference. Great event as always. The Global Renewables Alliance has actually been in the pipeline for some time. It was initially launched about a year ago at the COP27 in Egypt, but we really got going a few months ago with it. And it aims to be the single voice for the renewable energy industry at an international level. And it brings together 6 organizations who are the founding members. And so that's the global wind, solar, hydro and geothermal on the renewable generation side, plus long duration energy storage and green hydrogen to really put forward the voice of renewables at an international level.
So, and that already, now you narrowed it down to one sentence, but maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on the exact missions and goals.
Yeah, sure. I mean, well, the goal is clear. We, as you said in the intro, to push for 11,000 gigawatts of renewable capacity globally by 2030. In order to do that, we need to dramatically accelerate the scale up of renewables. So we, as an organization, we're a traditional industry association, and we focus mainly on influencing policymakers, raising awareness about the benefits of renewables. And we do that through attending international fora, doing some modeling, analysis and report writing, putting policy recommendations together and engaging as often as we can with the leading stakeholders and policymakers.
So really the letter and the push for the 3-Act Renewables by 2030 campaign is at the core of your organization currently. Now, specifically in the open letter, I think you brought together more than 250 climate and energy organizations. So maybe you can elaborate a little bit on how that open letter came about and what exactly its content is.
Yeah, so the idea of tripling renewables by 2030, wasn't really born by us. It came out of some analysis that IRENA did, So that's the International Renewable Energy Agency. They did the World Energy Transition Outlook. And in that, the analysis they did showed that in order to stay on track for 1.5 degrees, we need to triple the capacity of renewables by 2030 and double the intensity of energy efficiency. And so born out of that and discussions with IRENA, so we now, as the Global Renewables Alliance, have a formal MOU and a strong partnership with IRENA. And in fact, we've got a joint pavilion at the upcoming COP28 together with IRENA. And born out of those discussions, it was clear that we as the industry could help amplify and strengthen that tripling message by putting out a call from the private sector. So that was the idea for the open letter. I mean, it's addressed to world leaders. We did actually send it to all world leaders, not expecting necessarily a response from them, but simply to raise awareness of this target and the enablers that would be required in order to meet it. Now, the date, the 2030, is extremely important because that then pushes some urgency into the debate. Not a 2050 long-term goal, is really a short-term goal. And in order to meet that goal, we need to, as I say, take urgent action. And I'll come on to it in a moment on the enablers. Maybe you want to dig into that. But just to give some context of the ambition level, and there was some debate about what level this should be. 11,000 gigawatts is extremely ambitious, and it would require something like 3 gigawatts of additional capacity per day, every day between now and 2030. So that's 3,000 megawatts a day. And if you just think what 3,000 megawatts of renewables looks like, it's 3 large, huge offshore wind farms, and in solar, it's a significant installation. That's every day. And there's some significant barriers to that, financing, permitting, grids, and so on, that we need to overcome in order to facilitate that level of scale up.
As you mentioned, we'll dive into the exact necessary actions in a moment. But beforehand, maybe just another small question. It's because I opened with that, usually your impression after a COP meeting is that there were hundreds of lobbyists from the fossil fuel industry. So is you really forging this global alliance, finally bringing together at what, at least to me as an outsider, seemed to be a more scattered landscape amongst the renewable industry? So is there more of a balance in regards to what politicians are being addressed with?
Absolutely not. Even though we've established this Global Renewables Alliance, the imbalance is still significant, and it's multiples of difference between ourselves and the fossil fuel lobby in terms of the spending on lobbying. And I mean, the GRA was not born of nothing, I have to say that. I mean, it's established by some extremely credible and powerful organizations. The Global Wind Energy Council, the Global Solar Council, and so on. They do represent the major players in the industry, and the majority of renewable deployment globally is represented through those 6 organizations. So it's not come from nowhere. However, it must be stressed that the renewables industry is way behind the fossil fuel industry in our ability to operate, to influence policymakers, and to have a seat at the top table. It's starting. We see that. We were in New York 2 weeks ago at the New York Climate Week, where we launched our campaign on tripling. So it's called Double Down and Triple Up. And there the ambition is to, double down, obviously urgently increase energy efficiency, but also triple up renewables. We made a lot of noise on that. We took full page adverts in New York Times, billboards on Times Square, and took all the bus stops around Midtown Manhattan. Even that, with that level of noise, we got a lot of visibility, and it became tripling became a credible topic of discussion. But even with that, we're far behind what the fossil fuel lobby are able to do, and that's our ambition: is to ramp up the messaging, the communications, the policy content around scaling renewables.
You mentioned it a lot of times already. We need to triple the capacity of renewables in the next 6.5 years only. So what action in what areas is needed to achieve this huge goal? And of course, it's a global goal, but that means it's being addressed in very, very different regions with very different conditions. So maybe you can answer both, like the exact actions broken down into regions.
Sure. And as you say, I mean, and as I mentioned, it is ambitious. But the other reason for putting the open letter out was to say that we as the industry believe we can do it. So, yes, we can. but we need urgent action. And there's some specifics within that. And in the letter, we actually elaborate those enablers. We say barriers, but they're really enablers. However, to implement the 11,000 gigawatts, we really need to overcome those barriers slash enablers. And they are, first of all, financing. And in those regions of the world, developing markets, we need access to low cost of capital. And that's the critical piece. So low cost financing, where in some regions it's 2 to 3 times as much for capital as it is in the developed countries. We as renewables technologies, we don't burn oil, gas, or coal as fuel. We burn capital, and that's really the driver. The second is permitting, and permitting of all the technologies, including hydrogen and storage, and even grids. And there's huge blocks at the moment to permit renewable energy, and delay for our projects is quite often leads to death in terms of the project. So we need accelerated permitting. There's many ways to do that. And in fact, 2 weeks ago in New York, we launched a permitting paper with the Green Hydrogen Organization with a 9-point plan for how to accelerate permitting. So one-stop shops, digital permitting, and ways to reduce the queues in permitting. Currently, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of gigawatts of renewable capacity stuck in permitting in various different regions. The third is grids, so to connect the renewable energy. And there again, there's long delays with interconnection queues, but also new build interconnectors, both at transmission level, but also at distribution level. And with renewable energy, something like 70% of new renewable energy capacity will be connected at the distribution level, so at the DSO grid level. So we need some low voltage connection as well. The fourth is value chains. And value chains encompasses supply chains, so manufacturing, but also critical materials and the jobs and skills required to get it built. And the final one, I think really important one, is the just and equitable transition. So when we scale renewables to this extent globally, that we also take into account, a fair transition for communities, but also for nature. So, taking into account biodiversity, nature positive. And we put a big emphasis on that at the GRA.
So that's 5 core demands. I guess it's very easy for the industry to agree on these demands, and probably most politicians or policymakers would agree as well. I guess the solution is the big question. And I guess you gave it some thought as well. So do you have some proposed solutions how we could solve these barriers or overcome them?
Yeah. So it has to be done at the country level, as you pointed out in your previous question as well. Having this global target is fine, and it's not difficult to agree. I mean, I wouldn't say it's no regrets, but it's a pretty easy thing to agree that we need more renewables. But at the country level, and even national, but also local level, that's where the work really needs to take place. And going to those barriers, at a national level, in those developing countries, in Africa, there are significant currency risk, country risk, financing costs that we don't face here in the global north. And main focus at GRA is on the global south to try and accelerate the uptake of renewables in those regions. And the solutions really then are at the national level and even at the local level, as I say. So for permitting, there may be a national target for renewables, but if at the local level the communities are rejecting renewable projects, then the targets will never get met. So we need to explore how that can be done through engaging communities at an earlier stage, providing benefits for those communities, so they see tangible benefits to having them in their backyard. And the surveys we do show significant support for renewables. Wind has got above 70% support for having wind in your region, solar even higher. And even those regions that have had wind installations put in, the support is even higher than before they had it. So, those give us some encouragement that this can be done. But it's when you add up all those barriers together, that's where the challenge comes. So, if you've got financing barriers, you've got permitting difficulties, you've got local opposition, grid connection problems, and so on, then the challenge is quite high. Interest rates are not helping us. The inflationary situation globally is certainly not helping us, and significantly the supply chain bottlenecks as well are now having an impact, and especially in the wind industry, where, these are large infrastructure projects, large manufacturing capacities needed, and not just the turbine manufacturing. We need vessels, ports, roads, and infrastructure to be able to build large onshore or offshore wind farms.
So I guess all of these issues we could easily dedicate a whole episode to, in order to really walk through how we could solve all these small barriers along the road. But I think for this episode, let's keep it in the compressed version. And I want to dive into another topic that we didn't address yet. That is the question of limited resources in the physical sense, not limited resources in the sense of people involved in legislation or speeding up bureaucracy. But do we simply have enough raw materials to actually deliver on those goals? And do we have enough people in the field to really implement and build the infrastructure?
Yeah, it's a good question. We get that quite often. I mean, we're not so concerned about the materials, the critical raw materials, or the jobs and skills. I mean, our belief is that, and we've seen this in other sectors, other technologies, that once the market is there, the companies deliver and mines will open, people will be trained and so on. Now, it is a constraint, it is a bottleneck, and we need to be proactive about that in order to plan, so long-term planning. But in addition to the long-term planning, in parallel, we need long-term market signals. So we need, price signals, secure and stable markets for companies to invest. They're not going to invest in mines or manufacturing capacity or training staff unless they know that there's going to be a market. And this has been seen, successfully in, for example, Brazil or India, where, a local strong home market has brought on manufacturing capacity, training and jobs and so on. Yeah. The other things that are important are getting the funding right. So the financial conditions, the business models, and any support that's needed within those new markets to get them off the ground. So some specific solutions that can be implemented. And we've seen that many governments recognize the benefits of increased renewables and so are now starting to implement some of these key solutions.
All right. Let's imagine we really would deliver on those goals even until 2030 already, and we would be on a good timeline. Could we actually do without fossil fuels altogether? I mean, could we be too successful? Could it backfire, so to say? Or do we still need some fossil solutions as a backup for worst case scenarios, especially here in Europe, where we might be completely independent or partially dependent on electricity imports?
Well, let's be clear that by 2030, we will still need fossil fuel. Yeah, I mean, so the tripling of renewables to 11,000 gigawatts is a stepping stone towards, fossil fuel phase out, but it's a necessary stepping stone. But ultimately, we believe, yes, we can do without fossil fuels in the longer term. That has to be combined with renewable generation, combined with serious increase in flexibility, energy storage, and the energy efficiency, the energy reduction that I spoke about. So those combinations will ultimately lead to that situation. But as I say, 2030 is just a stepping stone on the road to that. Specifically on Europe, then yeah, I mean, ultimately we can be independent from an electricity point of view. We have more than enough resources within the European Union to generate the power that we need, as long as we implement things like increased interconnection between the markets. We have, in principle, a European market for electricity. And if that's properly exploited and the resources are exploited in the right places, then, of course, we can be independent of electricity.
Before we continue here, just a small detour, since you mentioned the significance of storage. Maybe you can just give us in a nutshell what your vision is specifically in that regard.
Yeah, with storage, we see, short duration storage, including EVs, by the way, lithium ion as coming online, very fast in an exponential way. And that will serve a great service in terms of renewables, having that significant battery storage capability. But long duration energy storage, it's worth mentioning, is critical to the mass scale up of renewable energy. We've heard of these periods, in winter where the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. And for those periods, we do need some significant long duration energy storage going forward. not immediately, but over the coming years, we'd need to see that coming online. And so, some support for that industry and acknowledgement, the huge benefits that can bring. So that combined with green hydrogen as another potential storage fuel will really, not just facilitate, but are essential for the mass scale up of renewable energy going forward.
Now, do you also address nuclear power in the letter? I know here in Germany, we successfully decided against it. Still, there are some voices to bring it back, especially when people look to France and see that France and other countries are still building up their nuclear capacities. So what stance does GRA take in regards to nuclear power?
Well, GRA, we don't take a stance on nuclear power, and the letter doesn't address it. The open letter is specific focus on tripling of renewables, but includes the doubling of energy efficiency. From a personal point of view, existing nuclear provides a great source of carbon-free power, and in my opinion, should be continued. The question of new build nuclear is really up to the countries themselves. Different countries, different situations. We as the GRA, we're not advocating for that. We're simply advocating for more renewables. We see a clear path forward for renewables, low cost and secure and faster deploy within all markets. So renewables are now cost competitive in almost all markets in the world, very quick to deploy, and can provide a solution in the very near term. So that's what we're advocating for globally.
What I would like to also ask is, because you mentioned in the beginning that it's not only about wind and solar, but also about geothermal energy. And that's a topic we rarely address here at the Smart EE in the podcast. So maybe just one sentence from your end. Where are we in regards to geothermal? And do you, for example, also see in a future in ultra deep geothermal energy?
Yeah, interestingly, geothermal has been around for quite a long time, but I'd say it's still at the very beginning of its potential journey. It has huge opportunity. And again, in most markets around the world, people will be surprised to know that most countries have geothermal potential. Some more than others, obviously. And we've seen that in Iceland, for example, but they're the front runners for obvious reasons. They have the resource close to the surface. But yeah, absolutely new drilling technology, new geothermal technology generally has lowered the cost and opened up access in many new markets. And I think we'll see a huge increase in geothermal over the coming years and could potentially play a really significant role in the longer term. And of course, it's clean and firm. And we need for firm power, and that could be, a significant advantage in the overall energy system.
Interesting to hear. Yeah, so it could be applicable globally, and it could run 24 hours a day. So that's really interesting. Now, let's be frank here at the end of the podcast. As you said in the beginning, those goals are really ambitious. But what's the point in having such ambitious goals if we're already failing to meet the old ones we had before? So, one could say maybe it's just about the symbolic nature, or are you really confident we can actually meet those goals?
Yeah, Zach, it's great to hear you being pessimistic for once. So let's say realistic, or is it even the devil's advocate in you that's questioning that? But you're right to question it. A lot of goals and targets out there. Listen, let's be honest. In order to meet a goal, the best way to meet a goal is to actually set a goal. Yeah, we're not going to meet any goals if we don't set goals. But that's all it is. It's a target, but it gives the context. And I think what we've seen over the last few months is significant support for that, not just from the industry, the finance community or the NGOs, but also from policymakers. There's now a significant coalition of countries joining forces behind this pledge to do tripling. And you'll see that come out at COP28. So the COP28 presidency themselves is leading on that. And I think we'll see a large number of countries signing up to it. And it's a specific target, for 11,000 gigawatts. So it gives us, the industry, some guidance, some direction, what investments will be needed, what level of human resource would be required, and start to ask questions around how could it be done? Who's going to pay for it? Where could it be done? Those are great questions. And those are the questions we relish, and we look forward to answering them on the road to tripling renewables.
And also, I think it's not to underestimate how important it is to have a very catchy campaign that gives people immediately an image in their head they can easily remember. And I think XXX until 2030 is just something people can immediately understand and also rally behind. And I guess that is one of the core functions of GRA, is to really bring people together and have them focused on the same goal. Because you mentioned you have 5 core demands. It's about finance, permitting, it's about grids, it's about the value chain, and last but not least, also about a just and equitable implementation of the renewable goals. So it is an ambitious agenda. I guess having a very clear and easily understandable goal really helps to really drill down in all those barriers we need to overcome. So thanks for joining me today. And anybody listening really needs to remember that abbreviation from now onwards, GRA, one of the most important organizations we now have globally in Team Renewables, I would say. Thanks a lot for joining us today, Bruce.
Thank you, Zach. A real pleasure.
For more exciting content in the form of presentations from our forums and conferences, studies, webinars, and more, visit thesmartere.com and check out the Smartere Digital.